tell us about yourself. What do you do and what are you working on now?
I am a celebrity influencer. No, I'm kidding. My name is Daniel Spates. I'm known by my social media handles, Dan from HR, in which I created in early 2021 while we were in the middle of the weirdest global employment history making issue that we ever had. And I decided to start making content to sort of explain how corporations work, utilizing the experience that I had as an HR business partner for companies like Spotify, WebMD, and Electronic Arts. And it kind of took off. And before I knew it, I was being invited, being honored and invited to podcasts.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I'm Helen Spalding. I'm content manager at Salt, and I'm just so excited to have this conversation with you. I'm joined by a member of our team in South Africa.
Hi, my name is Billie Demas, and I am the marketing manager for AMEA at Salt Recruitment.
Well, thank both of you. This is so exciting. I'm so glad to meet both of you. Helen, Billie Jean, thank you.
And to start us off with, for those of us around the world that are less familiar, maybe just joining the workforce or even a friendly alien visitor, how would you define compensation?
Oh, I loved that question. How do you define compensation to an alien visitor? Because it makes it sound so ridiculous. Because I would imagine you tell an extraterrestrial, all of us need basics to survive, like food and shelter and water and other random supplies. And you can't get those unless you buy them using paper and metal. However, you don't just get those; you have to earn those, and so there's the middle people of companies in which they say, "Hey, if you come do things for us, we'll give you some paper and some metal." But there's a wide, huge range of paper and metal that you can get based on thousands of different factors.
I want to know what makes compensation so important to Dan from HR.
Sure. So I think it's really fascinating because I feel so fortunate and privileged to have worked the roles that I have, where I've been one of the very few to access the compensation market surveys that we get. So I understand it from both sides in a very unique way. In the fact that for companies, compensation is nothing more than a business expense. They're like, okay, we need this position. You have to do this job for us. How much is that? How much is that work worth to us? To us, it's everything. To us, it's like, this is how I'm going to pay my rent. This is how I pay my bills. This is how I can potentially give me and my family a nice life. This is how I can potentially buy a second house. This is the difference between me and living on the streets.
So we're wondering, how have you seen the conversation around compensation develop in the US compared with the rest of the world?
So the US is really unique in the fact that it's like unregulated capitalism. Like anyone can come here, become a citizen, and potentially put together $1 billion. And there's a lot of tax law and a lot of standard practice that almost encourages that. The problem is you have to. You're most of us are very uninformed. None of us are ever taught this. No one understands what type of job families make the most money, or how you would even go about opening a business. And so there's almost a sense of, one, you come from that sort of family who can give you those resources, or two, you just sit and study and research it, and then three, you potentially have blind luck. I've worked a little bit with European markets and South American markets where things seem to be far more fair, especially because you pay so much more taxes to get better healthcare, whereas for us, health insurance is also part of the capitalist economy, and companies purchase that on behalf of employees to attract employees. But I would say the biggest change that I've started to see, especially over the last few years, is kind of an awakening, especially on a global scale, of what other people make and how this works, and especially this knowledge and understanding of how can I make this work for me.
I think that's quite interesting because they are becoming woken to what's happening, or they're becoming more aware of what other people are earning. And we're seeing that across sort of experience level, so entry level all the way up to C-suite. What do you wish candidates knew about compensation when applying for roles and going through this job seeking process?
I would say there's two things that are equally important. One, for the most part, there is a suspicion and an assumed suspicion of malice intent that companies are going to pay you as little as possible. And that used to be accurate. That used to actually be a thing. And we, especially in the late 90s, early 2000, the 2000 aughts, there were a lot of companies that used really negative tactic bonuses. Like managers would get a portion of how much they saved on their headcount budget. So they were incentivized to hire as low as possible. Then around 2004 is when the war of talent started, and that really awakened a lot of companies, thanks to HR people, by the way, that helped companies realize, hey, if you pay your highest performers really, really well, they will do amazing work for you. And so this is where things started to move a little bit outside of everyone just gets base, except, it's all employees get base and then managers get a little bit of bonus, to all employees starting to receive things like bonuses at all levels, as well as equity plans, because this was just a far more competitive way, one, to secure really good talent, and two, making sure that employees felt like they got rewarded for their work, which is, I know a lot of people don't believe that, but in all honesty, that's a golden principle for a lot of companies to follow, is that you give back to the employees who helped you get there. Now, of course, the split is very different. The CEOs are making 400 to 500 times as much as the people below, but, baby steps. The second one is, I just want people to understand this is not supposed to be something that causes you anxiety. The thing that's so nerve-wracking for us, and especially, like, I'll joke around when I make content saying, as experienced as I am in this, I still get nervous when a recruiter says, how much are you looking for compensation wise? There's an immediate sense of panic. I don't know, $5 billion, $300. I don't know what is the right number for me to say. But the most important thing is that the company has no anxiety whatsoever, and they're just looking for essentially a piece of data to put it in another piece of data. So there's really no wrong you can do. Like, this whole thought process that they're going to lowball you if you go too low, the company can't, because it's bound by its own internal philosophy. Or what if you price yourself out of a job? That's okay. That means that the role is going to be paid for. It didn't meet your qualifications anyway. And so I just want to remove the stigma and the anxiety of this element of the conversation.
Helen, before we move on, I just want to touch on that a bit, about how that you spoke about these myths in the early 2000s of how people were managers were rewarded for decreasing their spend when it came to compensation in their teams. And we saw this shift of people paying people worth their value, to get more out of them. We had this massive hiring trend 2019, 2020. How has that shifted over the last 4 to 5 years, where we've got mass amounts of people sitting in the job market for a very small, limited amount of roles?
Oh man, it has been, as a employment and data geek, the 2020 to 2023 has been absolutely phenomenal. Like, we all lived through history, like a huge momentous event. And even though I think none of us would want to do it again, like, there's no, you can't help but kind of see the silver lining in the fact that it did disrupt a lot of things that I think needed disruption. I think one of the biggest positives to this is the idea that people for the first time got opportunities they never had access to with the advent of remote work. So all of a sudden, I also experienced it, where I decided I was leaving work full time. I was going to open up a consultancy. I don't know if both of you are familiar, but Netflix has a very open communication policy regarding their compensation. They're like, we will pay everyone twice their market worth, because that's how much you're worth. But then, like, they don't do performance improvement plans. Like, then you just get managed out if they think it's time to go. But it's brilliant, because no Netflix employee wants to resign, because no company is going to be able to keep up with that. And there have been companies I've worked for that say, we don't try to recruit at Netflix, because it's just going to be a waste of time. Once you get to the offer phase, they're like, I can't possibly. We're like, we're breaking our back here. And they're like, it's 40% less below what I make now. But Netflix contacted me, and that gave me pause to stop consulting, because they're based in California, but they're like, we're fully remote now. We think, you have great experience from Spotify, similar business unit group. So that was sort of the opportunity that people were getting for the first time. Like, it wasn't just the Silicon Valley engineers that had access to this really high pay. All of a sudden, everyone else did. And I think that was great, that it sort of helped drive the conversation. I think now we're seeing the downside of the pendulum, because people who did get access to that now think that all these other companies are lowballing them, or underpaying them, or undervaluing them, where it's just they don't have the same resources that a Netflix or a Google can give you.
Very interesting. I think we need to talk more about that, about not everybody has the same pockets.
Yes.
I think that's a really interesting point, to kind of frame the question we have here around how the remote and hybrid work models have changed compensation culture within the US it can be around the world as well. Just thinking about whether compensation does shift if you aren't actually in an office, and those other kind of factors to consider as a job seeker, as a hiring manager, competing ultimately for the best talent, or, you know, searching through the options to find somewhere to kind of stick in for a while and you know, get some stability and earn some salary. How do you feel that that kind of shift, with more and more people working from home, more and more businesses kind of experimenting outside of the office and separate models to being in 9 to 5 every day, has impacted compensation culture?
So the biggest change that we saw, and I'd be so curious to know if it happened internationally, but in the US, we're a very region-based compensation culture. Because if I live in New York, I can easily pay $5,000 a month for rent and consider that to be a pretty good deal. And you know, daily life is anywhere between $30 to $40 between communication, bus, food. I can move 4 hours away to either down to Virginia or up to New Hampshire and pay something like $1,100 for a 4-bedroom house, and spend between $1 to $5 a day on food and transportation. So what we were seeing for the first time, before I say that, as a result, living in larger cities always commands a much higher salary. We use calculations like local cost of living as well as local cost of labor. So what we were seeing for the very first time, especially in the pandemic, where people were like, hey, let me take my $250,000 a year salary from New York City, let me move to Des Moines, Iowa, buy a house for the first time ever, because I never thought homeownership would be a thing I could do. And it's $9 and a bag of jelly beans to buy a house down here. Let me buy this house and feed my kids. And oh my God, I have a savings account now and I can pay my bills. The problem was, once you leave a location, a company is required now to adjust your location because you're no longer part of that high cost of living state. So this, I felt so bad because people are like, oh my God, I could buy a house, I could pay off my debt. Like, they felt financial freedom for the first time, but then companies were saying, no, well, you can't be making $250,000 if you're listed in Des Moines, Iowa. So then all these people started making all these angry comments. You know, location-based salary is a fraud, or you're just trying to save money. Where it's, from my side as a business side, I get exactly why we're doing it. If you're not part of New York City anymore, you should not be entitled to that premium, because it's like you got a salary increase where the rest of your team didn't. So that is an ongoing issue that we have with a lot of companies playing around with the idea of national averages versus location-based averages, which seems to work in areas outside of the major metro cities, but most companies are still doing some sort of hybrid between the two. I'd be curious, is that the same? Have you guys have you experienced that?
Yeah, I think it's quite similar. Especially in South Africa, what we saw was a lot of semigration. So people moving out to more rural or coastal towns that were cheaper. What Cape Town's not cheaper than Johannesburg, but they pay less in Cape Town compared to Johannesburg. But it's about that quality of life aspect. I think what also makes a difference, though, is that we tax nationally, so it's the same tax rates as opposed to like state tax. I think that's a very confusing thing for people that are not Americans, of how that impacts you. And when you hear like, oh, there's no income tax in, I don't know, Miami or Florida or in Texas or whatever, it's very interesting to see like how that impacts people's decision makings of where they want to live and work. But yeah, similar in South Africa. A lot of people moving to the Western Cape, Cape Town in particular, because of the improved quality of life and service delivery. But then that call to come back to the office has really frustrated a lot of people, I think.
I can imagine.
I think that's really interesting. And that kind of begs the question as well about hybrid, doesn't it? Because you could still be in New York, but not traveling in 3 days a week, but still be within that compensation. What was it called? The location rating.
Oh, location-based pay? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so for like for a premium city, for New York City, like there's a very standard thing that all New Yorkers know, which is when you're in your 20s and you go and live in New York and you live life like pretending to be part of Friends, and then you realize it's miserable because there's rats on the subway and it's $9,000 per day to live there. And then you meet someone and you start a family and you're like, well, we obviously we don't have a Rochester money. We can't actually buy a house here. So you buy a house in New Jersey, because New Jersey is a different state. Like New York, like to your point, Billie Jean, like New York City is so horrible because you have to pay federal income tax and you pay state income tax, but then you also have to pay New York City tax. So you get taxed 3 times if you work in New York City. So what people all will all do is generally once you're in your early 30s to late 30s, you buy a house in New Jersey and you're like, oh wait, this is what living is actually like. I can buy a house and I have a front yard and I don't see rats every day. And in 45 minutes, I could get to my high-paying New York City job.
I mean, we've spoken about it, and you take that into consideration. And companies are taking that into consideration when they're developing their compensation packages for a particular role, particular team, or yeah. What can we do as candidates, as job seekers? What can job seekers do to improve their knowledge around understanding how that works to make the best decision sustainably going forward and not what's good for right now? Because I think a lot of people did that over the last 4 years, and those needs have shifted.
So my thought process is, and this is without blame to anyone because no one ever informs us, but I think a lot of people are very unintentional about their careers and about their compensation as part of careers. They're like, I found this thing, it pays the bills every year. I get my 1% increase. On a good year, I might get a bonus. I guess this is just life. Where because no one is sitting down with you saying, okay, here's like the 6 different elements that impact your compensation with where you are now. Here's where you would potentially want to go to maximize those. So I actually published a book last year, and I call it like the first compensation book for the public. Because one of the first things that I really want everyone to know is the best way to think about this successfully is to take the same very cold approach that businesses do when they calculate it. There's 6 factors that go into your compensation. It's your job level, your job family, your location, the size of the company, the revenue of the company, and then the industry to job family alignment. So the perfect example I use is that software engineers. Everyone knows software engineers at the FANG big tech companies make the big bucks. It's because they fit 5 of those 6. They work in a role that companies value. So they're providing immediate value, even at whatever level. They have a niche skill set. They're working in San Francisco or New York City, and they're working in an industry, tech, that is really high revenue, very high profit margins, and places the highest value on that skill set. That's why software engineers make so much at FANG. It would be the same thing as like management consultants at Deloitte because they're doing the same thing. Or really, really good CPAs at the highest financial firms, it's the same things. So once you start to understand how those 6 factors impact yourself, you can start almost building an intentional model of where it is that you want to go.
That's an amazing answer. That was so good. Thank you, Dan. That was really, really interesting as well to hear that broken down in that way. There's been a lot of conversations over the last decade about the gender wage gap, and in newer conversations also about the racial wage gap as well, particularly within the US market. What do you think is being misunderstood about compensation when it comes to those discussions?
This drives me nuts because very well-intentioned people are creating a bad narrative unintentionally. So this is no disrespect to her, but there's a creator in the US called like Hannah Takes It to the Streets, or Salary Transparency Street. And so this person, Hannah, who I think worked like 6 months in recruiting or HR, so she got the very, very barest bones understanding of salary, but then she became famous because she would go to all these cities and say, what is it that you do and how much money do you make? And then so she became known as like the salary transparency girl, which I love her mission. But one, you're getting very anecdotal data that's not verified. So like there were several examples when there was actually one company I was consulting with where someone had a similar job to what Hannah asked for. And she was like, you guys are underpaying me because this person makes this much. And it's like, okay, Hannah on the street is not a verified compensation authority. If she asked me, I could say $5 billion. I could say a bag of jelly beans. No one would know the difference. But the most important thing is that she accidentally continues to reinforce misinformation. It's not just her, because if you go to Google and say, what is the ethnicity wage gap, or what's the gender gap, you have the Bureau of Labor Statistics will give you a percentage, but that's not valid because corporations do not have to provide their information to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So like the numbers that we often see is like 75 cents between men and women, and then like 67 cents between black women and white men. But the way that starts to figure is that if I'm a company and I hire 2 roles, I'm going to hire an accountant. If I hire the white accountant, it's 100,000. If I hire the black woman, it's 67,000. We don't see that at the micro level. We see variations of it, and it's usually based on years of experience, which is a whole other thing. But what we do see much more tangibly is the gap is due to lack of access to high-paying roles. And so what we'll normally see, especially for companies that are proclaiming to be really, really diverse and really intentional with the diversity, is that they do hire a good number of candidates from all sorts of diverse populations, but that's at the individual contributor to manager level. And they're normally paid all within about anywhere between a 3 to plus 5% ratio to each other, which is generally fine. Once you're at the director, senior director level, you see the whites taking over again. And especially at the highest level roles for like the highest revenue generating roles, especially like head of sales, CFOs, COOs. Generally, the C-suite is almost always white men. So it's that number is where we're seeing is pushing that gap. So on an individual level, companies are actually doing a lot better than I think people think. But what we have to really do is move on to make sure that everyone aside white men have access to the same level of high paying opportunities.
That's interesting. So it's not so much you're being paid less for the same role. The conversation should actually be around that progression, career progression, and equal access to opportunity as opposed to equal pay.
Correct. So by all means, companies should still make sure it's equal pay for equal work. I worked for 2 companies that did that, where at every sort of consistent checkpoint, we'd be like, hey, let's just take a look. And what's fascinating, this surprises people, in Sweden, women on general make more than men. So for Sweden, for whatever reason, when we were doing wage and gender adjustments, in many cases, it was like a list of men that we had to bring up to the women's average. So by all means, that should still happen, but I want there to be like, it's almost like a red herring to focus on over here versus wait, why is every C-suite making, it's less about this person making $3,000 less than this person, but why is every white person that's clearing $50 million all white?
That's a good point. And then you also have kind of the wage gap within levels of a company as well. So in the UK, where I think it is law that certain companies, I think it's public companies, provide the gender data each year, and actually examining the data, there's some quite interesting findings again, that you have the C-suite and the director level, senior level jobs skewing the average because they earn so much more and there is so little representation at that level. So I think that's very interesting. When you were talking about experience, there is that inequality early on in your career in terms of network, in terms of sometimes education access, qualifications, privilege is a factor there. And with regards to actually having that mathematical kind of model for compensation, is there something there in terms of the maths that we hope, is this really objective kind of keeping it impersonal? Let's try and pinpoint value and pinpoint need, I guess, for a workforce. How do you think that plays into this conversation about gender and race and compensation?
So we're seeing kind of a small revolution in the United States as it relates to educational requirements being mandatory for most corporate roles. When if you ask most corporate people to say, why is this degree necessary? They'll be like, it probably isn't. There's some exception like computer science and finance in which the things that you're learning and the methodology of how to think is valuable. And again, software engineers are a great example. There's a reason why these FANG companies go after these target schools for their comp science degree, because these students were taught things that they're going to be doing at these companies. But when I got my music degree, absolutely none of that helped me become an HR person. And there's like thousands of different corporate roles that colleges have no idea about. So this idea of like you have to go and get this document that said you have now put yourself in debt for the rest of your life, and shared a bunk and smoked weed and drank with your friends and maybe attended a class or two. Now I'm fit for corporate life. So we're trying to really push back on that. A lot of companies started to take a really hard look at their educational requirements. So this has a direct tie-in into our ethnicity gaps, because what we see is if you're not white, you have a much harder time of getting that college degree. And then we've started to see a huge uptick for that. In many cases, the big number is it takes 5 to 6 years, where it takes a white person 4. So now this is a year and 2 years that they're behind. Now, let's say we're talking about a Black woman. So she goes, she gets a degree, she gets these skills, now she's eligible for it, but now she's 2 to 3 years behind people that were privileged. And so she works for 3 years, and then let's say she has a baby. So then she's like, you know what? I want to go home. I want to take care of my baby. I'm going to be out of work. I want to take a full maternity. This is a really important, valuable lesson to me. So now she's out of work for that 1 to 2 years. Whereas, like, let's say if she's been in a relationship that whole time with the white person, now he has 7 years to her 3. So now if they both apply to the same role, a company is going to think, well, this person has 7 years. They earn more than the person that has 3 years. That's just simple math. But when you look at the context behind that math and what pushes it, you're like, actually, this is exactly why we have this wage gap differential.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you for going into a bit more detail about that, Dan. I think that's really interesting data to share as well.
What challenges and opportunities do you see for US-based businesses regarding compensation for the future?
My bet, if I was allowed to bet money on this somehow, would be companies that are proactively leaning towards transparency are doing better. It really blew my mind that New York City became, like, I was surprised that the New York City law passed for transparency because there's so much corruption from New York City-based companies. I'm like, oh, they'll pay off the politicians. That'll never pass. And then they did. And I was like, oh my God. But New York City companies knew that was going to happen. So, like, the Merrill Lynch's and the Price Waterhouses, that, like, these huge companies that I think Merrill Lynch is based in New York. We might have to cut that out. But anyway, like, you have these huge New York City powerhouses. Like, these are billion to $1 trillion worth of financial management assets. And now had a year to prepare for salary transparency, meaning that every single job description that was going up was now going to have to show a range. So what's the first thing you do? You do an audit and you make sure that every person is fair within range proactively, because you do not want that lawsuit. You don't want that in public. And then they didn't. And then they were obnoxious and they started putting like $5 to $2 million as the range because they could legally get away with that. And then in many cases, they were like, you know what, we will take the fines because that is less expensive to us than actually going in and fixing people's compensation. And that just, like, I was like, are you, like, you have $900 billion, man, just pay, like, you will never miss the money. Like, just give the $7 billion to your employees to right size everyone. And if you can proactively do that, you will build engagement for the team, because they're going to be like, you know what, this company did the right thing. They were like, our fault. We knew this was coming. Yes, we were mandated by law, but we wanted to get ahead of it. And so I've seen 2 companies do that, and they're relatively small, but the huge amount of engagement from their employees saying, we really appreciated that they did this, to me meant everything.
So it became a challenge, and then it's finding the loopholes.
Yes, I was like, how these companies are like, it pays less to pay off the fines every year by not being compliant than it would just to fix everyone. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
That's really interesting as well, isn't it? Because the size of the company as well, it's just not an equal playing field at any stage, really. With regards to that proactive, oh, sorry, Dan, go on.
I don't know if it's true in either of your countries, but in the US, by law, like, the 10 top earners from every company has to be made public. So, like, it becomes so difficult when there was one person who had hired me to help with their compensation. This is, again, is a $1 trillion industry. And she was like, she was, I think she was earning like 78. She wanted to get to 85. And so, like, when we went through everything, I pulled some market data for her. It all showed that she should be, anywhere between 80 to 90. So she presented a good case, and the company came back at like 82. And, like, that she sent me a screenshot of, like, the top 10 earners. Like, one had made like $4.5 billion last year. And it's just like, why is like, and, like, of course, you can't just treat an individual. You things that view as system scale, but, like, as it relates to how much of a gap there is between an employee and a C-suite, like, it is absurd.
Absolutely. I think within banking as well, that's one of the really the industries that's come under fire for obvious reasons over the last kind of, 25 years. And that's been really, really interesting, I think. And bonuses as a concept as well. Just muddying the waters, isn't it?
There's an article every couple of months that will talk about the CEOs and what they earn per day in South Africa. So I don't know if there's any legislation. I don't think there is, but it is, especially publicly listed companies. You can obviously find that information. And so it is a very interesting conversation, especially in a country like South Africa that has the biggest equality gap,
Right.
and also a very massive youth unemployment rate. And finding what is a fair entry level salary or internship salary, because people just want opportunity to get experience so they can get a paying job. And so they go, like you were saying earlier, they go into it unintentional because they're just desperate to get an income to afford the bare
It'll live. Yeah,
necessities.
absolutely.
To that point, Dan, about proactiveness and companies needing to be proactive, that ties to culture, doesn't it? And that ties to your employee value proposition in a sense as well, as a business that's hiring, competing for talent in this market. I'm wondering, when it comes to kind of philosophy, what are businesses getting wrong with their compensation philosophies? Do you see a recurring issue in your line of work? Feel free to also use examples here if it helps to illustrate it.
So the biggest thing is, I think, I don't know if it's coming from HR, and in many cases I don't think it is, versus I think there's a sense of this is just how we've always done it, to a sense of there's a reason the board of directors and C-suite is telling us not to do it. But the idea of not talking about compensation, far more frankly, with employees, to me is a huge, huge, huge miss. So at Electronic Arts, I thought they had one of the best, where it was relatively transparent, because it was the first company I'd worked with where we admitted to employees that we use something called a comp ratio, which is a calculation. So if I said you made $100,000, that doesn't mean anything. But if I said you made $100,000 out of 120,000, because that 120,000 is considered the mastery point, that means something. Or if the mastery point is 80,000, you make 100,000, that means something. So it measures the space you have between what a company considers a mastery point. So not only did Electronic Arts share that they did this, but they actively informed their managers and provided their managers with tools to have compensation discussions and to share things like what the mastery point was, so that employees had a good understanding of what it was they were looking for, and how this all worked. Spotify was a little bit weirder in the fact they shared that we did mastery points, but they wouldn't share what the number was. And I was like, we hire machine learning engineers and data engineers. They can figure this out very, very easily. There's a reason why you hire very brilliant people. So it was this whole almost like song and dance of like, well, I can't share your comp ratio number, but it's probably between 9 and 9.5. And they'd be like, okay, so it's 0.923 because I figured this, and you're like, I can't confirm or deny it. And it's such a huge waste of time. Whereas to me, like I found, if you treat people like adults, especially employees, hey, here's this information, here's how it works, here's the science behind it, here's the methodologies we use, here's why not everyone is paid at exactly the same rate, here's why we review things at every 6 months. People are like, oh, okay, thanks, that works. Or I don't really like this answer, but I get the science and logic behind it. And so just really informing managers and empowering them to have these conversations, because I can tell you every HR business partner is so sick and tired of having to deal with compensation gone nuts in a team where everyone is sharing things on a spreadsheet and everyone's lying to each other on the spreadsheet. And then they come up to you and they're like, why am I making 30,000 less? You're like, you're actually making $5,000 more. Like, he lied to you. Like, and so like just inform and conform and encourage this to be a far more open conversation, rather than just having this behind the wall mystery thing.
So, Dan, what does that effective training model look like for managers? Who's doing it? Is it HR doing it? Is it the finance manager doing it? Is it the managers going out there and doing their own research and saying, this is what does effective training on compensation look like in the perfect world?
I got in trouble at both EA and Spotify because I went rogue with my training. I'm like, I'm just going to tell you guys how I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I'm going to violate company policy, but here's how it works. I think HR people are probably the best equipped for it. Finance is the one that sort of finds where the money comes from and makes sure that the department is within reason. And we work with finance to make sure that the hiring is within the scope of how we can pay. But HR people are usually trained on how to provide information to managers so that they can have these conversations. So I found them to be extraordinarily effective. I also found really good managers who had mastered that, also made very good trainers.
I'm wondering if you could just give a message to hiring, well, let's say business owners, HR managers, HR directors now just listening to this thinking, okay, there's got to be some more transparency. There's got to be some actions that we take to stay competitive, to keep our talent, to keep attractive in this market. What do you think there's one thing they could do this year? Like, is there a starting point or a simple kind of activity or task that they can take away and go, okay, if I do nothing else, I do this and see how it goes?
I do, but it's not easy. One of the things that we had learned about really hard, especially white guys like me, when we started focusing on DEI, and we're like, here, poor disenfranchised people, we're doing all the work for you. We're going to make sure that we're going to announce you in the email as the first Black engineer we ever hired, which was an embarrassing day at Spotify, because all the white executives were so proud of themselves. I'm like, guys, this is humiliating. But the most powerful lesson from that was marginalized groups telling us, if we're not part of the conversation, you're not doing it for us, you're doing it for you. And I think that is the most important lesson for compensation. I think there has to move to a sense, especially if companies want to retain people, because right now people are only interested in their wallets. They will gladly take an offer, say they're excited, six months, 1 year down the line, if that offers 20% more, there's no reason for that employee to stay. And so, but to me, the idea of building engagement and building a sense of community is to involve employees in some of this decision making. And so I had tried several different pilot programs of having employees kind of get a discretionary pot of a bonus to say, okay, so we're going to give you like 80% of the bonus fund, or we're going to pay you 80% of the bonus fund, but 20% of the bonus fund is going to be given to employees to distribute among yourselves. It failed horribly. One person, like, it was essentially a popularity contest, and one person we found was threatening people for it, and then one person made everyone feel bad because they had a terrible situation. But it was a good pilot because it was the first time, we're like, let the employees decide. And so there's some sort of momentum, I think, from there that I think is sort of the way the future is going to go.
I love that. That's so interesting. I also love just hearing the reality of what that pilot turned into as well. It sounds like a reality TV show I would watch, to be fair. Bonus Island.
Really interesting.
Oh, that would be great.
It was very interesting.
We have this open capitalist market in America, very little legislation for certain things, where in a country like South Africa, we've got this basic Condition of Employment Act that governs the very basic bare minimum, and good companies in South Africa go above and beyond that. Do you think that globally, or even in the United States, that more legislature from state and federal policies would be more beneficial to job seekers when it comes to compensation, or employees when it comes to compensation? Or is it government becoming involved in my life?
In my business.
Yeah.
My thought process is my range is limited to only corporations. So I have no capacity to weigh in on like people who work in medicine, legal, retail, like any kind of front end or customer centric thing versus the corporations behind them.
Mm-hmm.
What I can say is that, like, I think we're also going through another minimum tax rate, minimum pay hike here. I don't pay attention to that anymore because there's no idea it has nothing to do with corporations. In many cases, they're already being paid anywhere between 3 to 4 times above that, just at entry level. And so I don't think that would necessarily see any kind of difference, but I do think there's going to be a continued push for transparency.
We have this open capitalist market in America.
Yeah, so I think my one remaining point, my biggest push when I either do classes on this or when I make content, is try to move intentionally to companies that use mixed model compensation. There was a point when I was in my early 30s where I was like, oh my God, I just crossed $100,000. And that to me, I was like, I'm rich. And it just meant I could pay my bills with a little bit less stress every month. And then I was thinking to myself, as I was sort of plotting out my career, I'm like, if I go down to, like, if I become an HR manager, an HR director, an HR VP, like, the most I'm really going to make is 250 to 300,000. And when you're at around 30, you can start to understand what finances mean. You're like, well, that's really good. I'm lucky because I can pay my bills, but it's not exactly like I can retire and enjoy the world. But what changed that was understanding that to make moves to companies that don't just pay you in salary, but rather do additional types of incentives. So that's where I made a very intentional decision to go to Electronic Arts, because I knew that they had both a bonus as well as stock. And then that kept me in that space because then I went to Spotify, who did the same. When you're working in compensation, especially, And the higher you go up, like when we're talking about job level, you can make very good amounts of money, especially at director level and above, because you're paid so well in that bonus and equity that is through, absolutely untapped capitalism, whereas like your base will never get above a certain level. So my advice to everyone is to understand how that works. I'm not sure how that necessarily translates to other countries, but I do know that we offered our stock at Spotify to people outside the US, but to move to companies that don't just look at base for compensation.
How do we find that out? How do you candidates and job seekers, where they're going to go to a website, they're going to look at the jobs available on a career page. Where do they find out that information?
So this is the thing that sucks. Companies do not have to disclose anything to the public about their compensation. It's highly protected. It's considered business intelligence. So companies in many cases are not going to necessarily advertise that. Generally, you will almost always find it though in larger companies. And then there are crowdsourcing sort of websites like levels.fyi. Glassdoor isn't necessarily the worst job for it. But you can go and say, hey, does this company do stock or does this company do bonus for its employees based in France? Things like that.
Okay, cool.
That's really interesting. And it's also just great that you've explained that, Dan. I think mixed model compensation, just to know that in a negotiation, to know that in an interview, shifts what a candidate can ask, right? And coming from a position of knowledge about that upper echelon or those final kind of couple of decades, the majority of your career, it's good to have that information. I think as long as you get past that, I got a job, thank goodness, what's next after that. I just want to give you the floor and just let you say what you're working on, how people can work with you, if there's anything they should keep their eyes open for, and feel free to use your handles, etc. We'll also use this in the write-up and in the descriptions of everything as well.
Okay. People can find me all over social media, primarily TikTok as the Dan from HR, and then on other social medias as Dan from HR. I was very, very happy and very, very proud that I published 3 books, one on resumes, one on interviews, one on compensation. 2 more are about to get launched, one on job families and how job families work. Thank you. And then one on if you wanted to work in HR. I have decided to pivot away from job search a little bit. So I'm going to be handing over operations to a business associate of mine. So I'll continue to make content, but focus a little bit less on that and focus much more on building an HR business partner community called the hrbps.net. And that will launch sometime in July.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for your incredible answers. I'll pass Billie the mic now.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about the conversation that we've had. It's not something that we talk about enough. I found you on TikTok and I was like, Helen, we need to speak to Dan from HR.
Thank you.
Definitely had a fangirl moment the first time we spoke, but thank you so much. And I'm hoping that this is a carry through and that we get to have more conversations and we get to bring more people that have the ability to make the change into this conversation and get people talking.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. This was such a pleasure.